Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Angela Stienne. I'm a museum researcher and I'm the founder of Mummy Stories. Today I'm here to tell you all about Mummy Stories, how it came about, what it's all about, and how it's a good example of using storytelling in and out of the museum. But first, a bit of context. I grew up in Paris and I became passionate about ancient Egypt at a really young age. In fact, when I was 13 years old, I decided I wanted to be an Egyptologist. So at 19, I moved to the United Kingdom to pursue a bachelor's degree in ancient history and Egyptology at University College London. There I realized that what I was passionate about wasn't just ancient Egypt, but actually how it's represented in museum. And that's why I decided to move to the Midlands to pursue a master's degree and then a PhD in museum studies. All my studies have been about Egyptian mummies in museums. This is my area of research, human remains. It's a very unusual one, but it's actually a really fascinating one. It is while I was doing my PhD and uncovering all these fascinating stories about Egyptian mummies that I decided to create Mummy Stories. The reason is that while I found all these great stories, I was looking for a platform to share them, but there's not a lot about human remains and Egyptian mummies, and certainly there was none at the time. So I decided to create Mummy Stories. When I started sharing those stories, I realized very quickly that what I wanted to do wasn't so much talking to people, which is exactly what I'm doing now, but actually I wanted to have a conversation and exchange, and I was really interested in other people's opinion about Egyptian mummies in museums. So I decided that what I wanted for Mummy Stories wasn't me talking to people, but actually I wanted people to share their own stories. And especially I wanted a lot of people from different backgrounds with different opinions and feelings to share their stories. And that's what Mummy Stories is doing. It is a platform where everyone can share their stories of encounters with human remains in museums. So this is a bit of the stories and how Mummy Stories came about. But what it's all about is this idea that there are a lot of people who visit museums who have opinions from any kind of background and any kind of interest, but there's no platform to share them. Especially for the topic I was looking at, there definitely wasn't any. So what we're doing with Mummy Stories is we have a platform, a website, mummystories.com, and a Facebook page where people can send their stories and they can share their own opinion. And I'll tell you a bit more later about how practically we're doing this. But let me tell you a bit about the stories that we're getting. The stories we received on Mummy Stories come from a lot of countries and a lot of people with different interests. We have curators, for example, writing stories. The curator of the Manchester Museum Ancient Egypt and Sudan collection, for example, wrote about how seeing Egyptian mummies when he was young really sparked his interest and his career trajectory. We have conservators that talk about how walking on a day-to-day basis with human remains really shaped the way they think about human remains and how emotional this walk really is. We even have the former Minister of Antiquity, Dr. Hawass, who wrote a story about his own walk with Egyptian mummies. But the stories we have, they don't just come from curators and researchers like myself, they come from people who just visited museums and really want to talk about their feeling. We have stories about people who had never been to museums until they wrote their story and had encountered the Egyptian mummies for the first time, and they talk about what it's like to see Egyptian mummies for the first time. We have stories from someone, for example, in China, who talks about how culturally they don't see Egyptian mummies there because they're not in permanent collection, and how it felt to go to museums in Europe for the first time and seeing Egyptian mummies and seeing how passionate everyone in Europe seems to be about Egyptian mummies. We have this brilliant story of a child who had read a lot about Egyptian mummies in comics and then came to Newark Museum in Leicester to see the Egyptian mummies there on display and was actually terrified and decided that Egyptian mummies are not that great actually. These are brilliant stories about real emotional encounters. We've collected over 50 stories now on Mummy Stories, and they come from virtually all over the world. We have stories from China and Thailand. We have stories from Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the United States. We have stories from France, the United Kingdom, Italy and Portugal, and more recently we just got a story from Russia. So we're covering all the world, but we're also covering a lot of opinion. A lot of our stories are also from people who think that it is ethically wrong to have human remains on display. They are people who send stories and talk about how they're thinking about whether their children or their parents or grandparents would agree to be on display in museums to the public. We have people that think about consent, and we have people that think that human remains should not be on display, or people that think that they should actually be on display, but that we should give a choice as to whether people should see them or not, with things like warning signs. These opinions that are very important opinions, they come from people that are not necessarily from the sector, but people that have visited museums and people that have emotions and want to share their opinion. And museums don't always foster for environment where people can give their opinions, because as many of us will know, questionnaires are not always something that people feel comfortable in answering with opinions that go against the museum policies or practices. So these are the kind of stories we've collected. Now I'm going to talk to you a bit about how you can implement storytelling in your museum, how we're doing it at Mummy Stories, and how it's actually a very simple thing, but it comes from a very strong ethos, which is that everyone should be able to tell a story. Mummy Stories is a digital project, which means that it's entirely online. We have a website, mummystories.com, where we store all the stories. As I said, we've got 50 plus stories on the website. But it also has a blog where I talk about current issues, the work I do, current controversies in museums, and issues such as the exhibitions of Body Walls, which is a very controversial exhibition of human remains, which raises questions of consent among many other issues. I review exhibitions such as the Musée de l'Homme in Paris, and I talk about current conversations such as the discussions around the retention of skulls in European museums. These blogs, they provide a strong core for this conversation, but they also provide reading material for people. They're accessible, they're not heavily academic, and they really help foster this idea that we can all have access to the conversation and to the knowledge on this topic. Mummy Stories also has resources, videos that people can watch, other blogs and other websites, interviews that I've done around the world. It is a website that's completely accessible and that has the core of Mummy Stories. But a lot of our engagement actually happens on social media, which is the case for a lot of projects these days. And so on Facebook we have over 2,000 people that are incredibly involved in the discussions. We post very regularly, every day now during the confinement, to keep people busy and have reading material and to keep people engaged in the conversation. Our Facebook page is incredibly community oriented. It's a brilliant resource, it's a brilliant community, and it really shows that storytelling is something that people crave, and the engagement is absolutely brilliant. It's incredibly friendly, considering that it's a topic where people have very strong opinion and often disagree, but actually we've managed to build an idea that everyone can have an opinion, and every opinion is valid as long as we're being respectful of each other. So a lot of our work is on Facebook and on a website, which is incredibly low cost. It's just about building a website, which today can be done really easily. My background is not in programming, and so I've built all of it myself. But what's really important is that, of course, we have these resources, we have a website and a social media that's available and that's very active. But I think that what makes the strength of Mummy Stories is the idea of community, and it's the idea of storytelling. And then a very important one, which we can have community and storytelling without, and it's inclusion. At Mummy Stories we talk about a topic that's quite complex. Human remains in museums is not an easy topic. And Egyptian mummies have often been left out of the conversation, but in many ways they're actually at the heart of the conversation on human remains in museums, but also on decolonization, on inclusivity, on ethics, on bodies in museums. And it is because it is a topic that often we think we know very well about and that everyone agrees on, that it is easy to build this community. What we're doing is giving a chance to people all around the world to be actors in the conversations in museum. That is what storytelling is about. It's not just people that are telling their stories. By publishing them on a platform which is inclusive, which has curators, researchers, ministers, agents in the making of museums by including visitors, the public, people who really disagree, people who have never been in museums, people who really don't like Egyptian mummies, for example, by including them in the same platform and allowing everyone to share their story. We've created a community where people feel empowered to have a say in what museums are about, to have a say about how things should be displayed, how we should talk about human remains, but that could be any topic. We've created a community where people are agents of change in museum, and that is the strength of the storytelling. I hope that this project will encourage you to do the same in your museum, because even if you're at any stage of a museum, any size of museum, storytelling and projects that are all about inclusion, they're really the future of change in museums. Thank you, and I hope that you'll visit Mummy Stories soon. Bye bye.